I'm interested just about how we come to define the Tacoma community, because that's another sort of thing that people have a lot of trouble putting a label on, and maybe you can't do that, but how would you define Tacomans in general?
You mean that we would have a personality?
Yeah.
Well, I would say we're more, I would say on the whole, we're definitely more Macy's than Nordstrom's. Or we're even maybe more JCPenney's than Macy's even. I would say that we like value. We're certainly not a high income town compared to some of the places around us like Fox Island or Gig Harbor. But I would say we're a hearty, good group of people. The Tacomans make good neighbors.
Washington State and Tacoma are both very sort of militarized parts of the region, yet it doesn't seem to be reflected as much in the people of Tacoma. Do you see a sort of disconnect there?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know that there's that much differences between the two.
Okay.
I mean, we can hear the fort, all the time. We don't necessarily see it. We see the planes coming and going to McCord. I would say I wouldn't think of there's being any sort of separation. No. I mean, we have the men and women that are stationed here are certainly an integral part of our communities and our economy, and we love having them here.
So let's go back really far and let's see what you know about this. It's a long time ago when there were trains that were directed into Tacoma, and then that got shifted up into Seattle, and that really changed because to my understanding, Tacoma used to be sort of the center part of the region.
Tacoma was the western terminus of the Northern Pacific Railroad, and the Northern Pacific Railroad, in a sense, is the parent of Tacoma. And later, as Seattle grew more prosperous in the late 1890s, the Klondike Gold Rush, and into the beginning part of the last century, Seattle became more important for the railroads, and more of the business originated there. And eventually, you have, by about 1921, the Northern Pacific took its headquarters, its western headquarters, and moved it from Tacoma to Seattle. Yes.
Okay. And do you feel like, I mean, and this kind of gets back to what Tacoma is trying to be, do you think Tacoma is trying to sort of reclaim what it once had from so long ago?
I think we're progressing along our own lines of development.
Okay.
And I don't necessarily think we would want to be like any other city. There are many good things about the city of Portland that Tacoma could emanate, particularly its interest in landmarks and its lively downtown. But I don't think we're trying to be something like the next city to the north. No, we can't. We don't have that population base. We don't have all those people with those advanced degrees and things like that. But they've gone off and done their own development. Seattle's a unique city in the whole United States, and we too are our own unique city.
They say Seattle is the city of people that aren't trying hard enough, and Tacoma is the city of people that aren't trying. How do you feel about that statement?
Well, I don't know. I look at my sister lives in Seattle, and she works for Nordstrom's, and she works very hard. And I think perhaps maybe it's the opposite. Seattle seems to be full of people that move to Seattle full of ambition, and Tacoma's, for those of us with additional Tacomans, I would say Tacoma in respects is a little more laid back.
Okay. All right, another history question.
Yeah.
In the 1960s, Tacoma was sort of divided over a very liberal and very conservative issues, and this resulted in the then mayor, who was Albert Rasmussen.
Yes.
Albert Slim Rasmussen.
Rasmussen.
Yeah,
yes.
and he went sort of berserk apparently at the end of his term, and he made some rash decisions and that were sort of damaging to Tacoma.
Well,
so
I'm not sure that would be the characterization. Slim Rasmussen was a longtime employee of the Northern Pacific. He worked out in the shops, and the shops out there was at one time the biggest employer in Tacoma. And he was a blue-collar Democrat, had served for a long time in the legislature. And what had happened was that one of his Democratic opponents in the legislature had gerrymandered the districts so that Rasmussen couldn't serve in the state senate anymore, and he wanted to do something else. He ran for mayor of Tacoma. And he was not really, perhaps temperamentally fitted well to be the mayor of Tacoma. He was used to being a legislator and being able to say and do whatever he wanted as a legislator. But being the mayor is a different sort of responsibility and a different approach to it. And so he did not like the then city manager, Dave Rollins, who was a very strong city manager, and Rasmussen wanted to fire him. And what happened was that was how we got the two different factions. It was the pro-city manager faction and the pro-mayor faction. And what had happened that Rasmussen had only served a term as mayor. He was defeated for re-election that first time he ran. But then the people who were his allies then took over the council, that they had won the other seats. And they were sort of a raucous group. They had meetings that lasted till midnight or 1 a.m. in the morning. And they took on a lot of different subjects that really aren't subjects that municipal governments, take on, that you can really legislate. For instance, the city can't legislate how, whether strikers or how they operate their strike, but the city council thought they could do things like that. So the public ended up disliking this council. So in September of 1970, the voters of the city by 70% margins recalled the majority members of the city council, Slim Rasmussen's allies. Now, what happened was that after Slim was defeated for mayor, then when the state senate reshuffled again, then he went back and served the rest of his life in the state senate again. Mm-hmm. And he's fairly productive. He's the fellow who gave us a real old issue, because his political career went back to the 1940s. He's the person who got us colored oleo margarine in the state. And people don't realize this now, but in the old days, of course, you had butter, and butter was yellow. But oleo margarine didn't have a color; it was white. And so, if you wanted to have a margarine the same color as butter, you had to mix that yourself, by hand or whatever. And because the dairy interests were so strong in the state, so Slim, and this is about 1944 or 1948 or so in there, came up with a citizens initiative so that you could buy colored oleo margarine in the grocery store that looks like butter. But it was those sort of little guy things, and up against the big interest that Senator Rasmussen was so good at in the legislature, but didn't really work as well, for him when he was mayor of Tacoma.
How does that history sort of compare to more contemporary times and sort of maybe the liberal conservative divide?
Tacoma politics is so sleepy now compared to those days. Those days was there were lots of people, council meetings, there was lots of participation. When you went to work or you went to school, you ran into your friends at the grocery store, you would go, oh my gosh, look what the city council's done now. Isn't that great, or isn't that horrible? The city council was much more the focus of the citizens, and the city government was there in the late 60s and early 70s, such that we had our highest voter turnout for a municipal election ever that we had in 1969. Well, the city has something like 40,000 more people living in it than 1969, but we haven't had a proportional increase in the number of voters. So people were very much interested in it, but because we spent so much time arguing and fighting, we didn't get as many things done. So you had Lyndon Johnson, the Great Society, the federal programs to aid urban areas, and we lost out on a lot of those things because we couldn't get our act together to figure out what we wanted.
I've heard that something like 1 in 3 Tacomans is a former convict. Do you know if that's an accurate statement?
No, that's what people would say about here. No, people say, well, that sounds like my brother-in-law's family. Yeah. Well, I don't have a brother-in-law, so. But no, that is not true.
Okay.
What happens, that is not even true amongst the class of renters. It's not true amongst the people who are low income. It's not true of any ethnic group even. That is just a gross exaggeration. Now you see people, now if you include people who have traffic tickets, depending upon, how you want to define them, well sure, I bet you a third of the people have traffic tickets or parking tickets, but no, there's nothing like that. And I've lived now, since 1985 I've lived in Hilltop, and that isn't even the proportion of people in Hilltop.
Tacoma, as I understand, was once being considered for the capital of Washington State, and that's why we have those two lion statues over in Wright Park.
Well, that's sort of close to that.
Okay.
At one time we did promote Wright Park to be the state capital. Mm-hmm. And what had happened is that Olympia has always been a small town, relative to Seattle, Tacoma, or Spokane, and now even small compared to Vancouver, Washington. And so we wanted to become the state capital. Northern Pacific wanted us to become the state capital. And we got as far in about the 1907 session of the legislature. The legislature actually passed an act, and Governor Meade vetoed it. And what the interesting thing is, if you go down to Olympia and you look at the state capitol buildings, you'll realize the state capitol buildings were only built in the late 1920s. It was because we were always against permanent appropriations for the state capitol buildings. And so for many, many years, we kept it so there weren't buildings built in the capital city for the state government. The old Capitol building, down there on, what is it, Sylvester Park, further down Capitol Way, that actually originally was the Thurston County Courthouse that the state took over to become the state capitol.